It happened at 9:06 a.m., right after I'd poured my second cup of coffee. "Ethan, can you step into Martin's office for a moment?" Vanessa from HR stood stiffly outside my cubicle, voice clipped and unreadable. I knew something was off the second I saw her. HR doesn't do drop-ins unless it's bad news. I set the coffee down, smoothed the front of my shirt, and followed her without a word. Martin didn't look up when I entered. He just gestured to the chair across from him like we were old friends grabbing lunch. "Thanks for coming in," he said, as if I had a choice. "I'll get right to it. Due to ongoing restructuring efforts, your position is being eliminated effective today." I blinked once. "No, we appreciate your contributions. No, this isn't a reflection of your work. Just a clean surgical, cut through 17 years of loyalty." Vanessa slid a manila envelope across the table. Severance paperwork, NDA clauses, a brochure for emotional support counseling as if a printed pamphlet could patch the hole they were punching in my life. "You'll have 30 minutes to collect your things," she said. Martin still hadn't looked me in the eye. "This isn't personal," he added flatly, like that made it better. I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak. Anger would have been easy. So would outrage. But I'd learned long ago those emotions were gifts you didn't hand to people like Martin. I stood, tucked the envelope under my arm, and walked out without a word. Back at my desk, people pretended not to notice. The young guys I'd mentored were suddenly fascinated by their keyboards. My cactus leaned slightly toward the window, oblivious. I packed slow, deliberate. Mug, charger, framed photo of Emma and me from her 5th birthday now she was in middle school. Every item had a weight to it. 17 years. I walked past Martin's door on the way out. He didn't say goodbye. Didn't even fake it. Just watched me go like he was making sure I didn't take a stapler. But I didn't take anything that day because I already had everything I needed. They thought this was the end. It wasn't. It was just the beginning. 6 months earlier, we were circling the drain. Revenues down 40%, debt obligations stacking like poker chips at a bad table. The board was nervous, vendors were tightening terms, and our credit line was shrinking by the week. I was the only one who seemed to realize we were already in the red. Martin kept saying, temporary turbulence. His solution? Flashy rebrands, empty slogans, a new app no one asked for. But I'd seen the real numbers because I was the one running them, and they didn't lie. It started with a spreadsheet I built after hours, cross-referencing every expense from the past 24 months. Office perks, underused software licenses, consultancy fees that had ballooned without justification. I saw patterns no one else noticed or maybe didn't want to. We had 3 divisions doing the same job under different names. 6-digit contracts with vendors we hadn't reviewed in years. I stayed late for weeks, eating dinner out of vending machines and running financial models until 2 a.m. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just couldn't watch the house burn down while everyone else poured gasoline. What I built wasn't flashy. No viral marketing stunts. No breakthrough product launches. Just a quiet, brutal path to solvency. Kill the redundancies, liquidate the non-performers, renegotiate contracts, and sell off the commercial real estate we didn't need anymore. It would hurt, but it would work. I presented it to Martin in a closed-door meeting. He scanned the summary, then tossed it aside. "This is doom and gloom," he said. "We need optimism right now, not austerity." I left the room deflated, but not defeated. Because 2 weeks later, the board got involved. And suddenly Martin was calling my plan a compelling internal strategy. The recovery began quietly. Expenses dropped. Cash flow stabilized. By Q2, we were back in the black. Everyone cheered. The media called it a miracle. Martin stood on stage at the all hands, rattling off buzzwords like vision and leadership. My name didn't come up once. That was fine. I wasn't looking for a spotlight. But I did keep copies of everything. Spreadsheets, version histories, emails, meeting notes, because something about the way Martin smiled too wide when he said, "We did it," told me it wasn't over. And I don't believe in miracles. I believe in math. It didn't happen all at once. That's the trick with financial collapse site creeps. First, it was a missed vendor payment blamed on a systems glitch. Then came the delayed payroll bonus, the halted expansion, the polite silence when someone asked about quarterly projections. I knew something was wrong the day I saw an internal memo classifying a 2.1 million marketing spend as miscellaneous. Miscellaneous. That was the word they used to hide panic. I dug in that night. Pulled up 5 years' worth of financial reports, vendor ledgers, and capital project filings. It wasn't pretty. What I found were bleeding wounds the leadership refused to bandage. RD had tripled its spending since the last product launched, nothing to show for it but vaporware and buzzwords. Executive bonuses were climbing even as revenues fell. We'd opened 2 satellite offices for strategic visibility, but both were burning through cash without generating a single new contract. Meanwhile, Martin was flying business class to speak at conferences where our name was barely a footnote. The numbers weren't just bad, they were dishonest. So I built a master ledger. Every dollar, every discrepancy, every silent sin buried in optimistic forecasts. I didn't tell Antonino yet, because I'd seen what happens to messengers. Martin didn't like bad news, especially not from someone who couldn't quote Simon Sinek. But it wasn't about impressing him anymore. It was about survival. The company was on life support and nobody wanted to say it out loud. Every night, I worked late. I wasn't trying to save my job. I was trying to save everyone's. The interns, the junior staff, the single moms on payroll who didn't know the office snack bar cost more than their child care stipend. Someone had to face the truth. And truth, in this place, was radioactive. Still, I kept going. Quietly, carefully, because someone had to know where the bodies were buried before we could start digging them up. And I already had the shovel. I booked the conference room myself. Martin didn't know the meeting was coming until the invite landed on his calendar with a subject line that simply read, "Proposal urgent." I printed a 34-page report, bound it, labeled it, and placed a copy at every seat before he walked in. When he arrived, latte in hand, he raised an eyebrow. "You're not on my calendar this week." "I am now," I said, and opened the first slide. I walked him through it line by line. Not the watered-down version for PR, but the reality department redundancies, facilities we didn't need, software licenses we'd paid for 3 times over. I showed him how we could sell non-performing assets and lease back space, how we could cut R&D by 40% without touching the one project that might actually deliver. I wasn't gentle. We didn't have time for gentle. Martin skimmed the first few pages, then leaned back in his chair. "This is a little extreme." "So is bankruptcy," I replied. He tapped his pen against the table, glancing at the clock. "You want me to go to the board with this?" I nodded. "We're not going to save this company by pretending everything's fine. This is how we keep the lights on." He didn't speak for a while. When he finally did, his voice was low. "You're right about the numbers," he admitted. "But if this leaks, if people start talking about layoffs or closures, we'll tank morale. Investors will panic." "Then don't leak it," I said. "Own it, quietly, and let me help." He hesitated, then nodded once. "Fine. We'll try it your way, but this stays between us." I should have known then that when someone says, "between us," what they really mean is, yours if it fails, mine if it works. But I wasn't thinking about credit. I was thinking about payroll, vendor confidence, and keeping the company solvent past next quarter. I handed him the USB drive with the full plan. He slid it into his pocket without looking. "Let's hope this works," he said. I already knew it would. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was how far he'd go to pretend it was all his idea. By Q2, the numbers had stabilized. Vendor debt was down, cash flow was up, and investors were tentatively smiling again. The survival plan was working. We'd trimmed fat without bleeding talent, closed 2 redundant locations, and moved 5 legacy systems to a cloud model that cut our overhead by 22%. I should have felt proud. Instead, I sat in the back of a packed auditorium, watching Martin stand under a spotlight and say, "This company didn't need a miracle. It needed leadership." The applause was loud, too loud. Especially considering the man on stage hadn't opened a single spreadsheet in 6 months. The press loved it. Business Insider ran a profile. The CEO, who steered through the storm. Martin smiled in photos, hands clasped in that practiced, humble leader pose. He dropped lines like, "It was a matter of focus and execution," and "I made some tough calls, but the results speak for themselves." He never mentioned the plan by name, never mentioned me. Not once. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't in this for headlines. I had a job to do. But then came the internal newsletter, his, quote, front and center. Then came the board announcement about a new innovation task force that would report directly to him, an idea I'd pitched 6 months earlier. And then came the emails. Long threads I used to be CC'd on, now missing my name. Strategy meetings scheduled without me. A slow shift that didn't feel like restructuring. It felt like erasure. I tried to let it go. Told myself I wasn't here to build a legacy, just a livable future for the people who kept the place running. But late at night, in the office, after everyone else had gone home, I'd stare at the whiteboard full of projections and feel something bitter swell in my chest. He'd taken everything we built and polished it into a brand new version of himself. He didn't need the truth. He needed a narrative. And I was no longer part of it. It started with a missing login. I tried to access the budget forecasting tool I'd built myself, and the system kicked me out. User credentials not recognized. I reset the password. Same result. I submitted a ticket to IT low priority, just in case it was a glitch. It wasn't. A day later, the file access logs showed my admin rights had been revoked. Quietly. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. Next came the project calendar. Meetings I'd created were now owned by someone else. Invite lists trimmed. My name vanished. The finance intern I trained last summer was suddenly leading reviews I used to chair. I stopped being asked for input. Then I stopped being told anything at all. I went to Martin's office on a Thursday afternoon, the hallway quiet, his door open like a dare. He looked up with his usual smug calm. "Ethan, everything okay?" "You tell me," I said, shutting the door behind me. "I'm being shut out of tools I created, projects I led, and systems I'm still accountable for. What's going on?" Martin leaned back in his chair, templed his fingers like he was about to deliver a TED Talk. "We're in the middle of a strategic realignment," he said. "New org structure. New workflows. It's not personal." "Really?" "Because it feels surgical," I said. "Feels like you're rewriting history and making sure I don't have a pen." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're restructuring for agility, Ethan. Flattening hierarchies. The board loves what we've done. They're pushing for leaner teams, broader ownership. You're still here. You're still valued." "Then why do I feel like a ghost?" Martin sighed, as if this conversation bored him. "You're overthinking it. Maybe take some time. Recharge. Your burnout's been showing." Gaslighting, plain and simple. I left his office and went straight to my desk, where an IT admin was disabling my old laptop and leaving a new one. Clean slate. No legacy files. Just a welcome screen and a subtle message: "You don't belong here anymore." They wanted me invisible. They thought I'd fade out quietly, a relic of the crisis they'd rebranded as a triumph. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Because ghosts have long memories. And I was just getting started. Back to present day. The office felt quieter than usual, like it knew something I didn't. I sat at my desk, staring at the blinking cursor in a half-written email, when Vanessa's voice interrupted over my shoulder. "Martin needs to see you." No smile. No inflection. Just a sentence she'd practiced on the walk over. I followed her down the hall, passing coworkers who pretended not to look, but whose eyes flicked up just long enough to register what was happening. I knew that walk. I'd escorted others down it in better times. I just never expected to be the one at the end of it. Martin didn't stand, just gestured to the chair like he always did when delivering news he didn't want to own. Vanessa took her seat beside him, flipping open a slim folder like it was just another Wednesday. Due to departmental restructuring and strategic reprioritization, your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. No eye contact, no explanation. Just a tidy little phrase designed to sound neutral while cutting deep. I said nothing. Martin cleared his throat. We appreciate your contributions, Ethan. Truly. But it's time for a new direction. I nodded once. Not because I agreed, because I refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Vanessa pushed a manila envelope across the table. 2 months severance, non-disclosure clauses, the usual script. My signature was the last thing they needed. Back at my desk, the silence buzzed in my ears. A few glances from the newer hires, quickly withdrawn. Most didn't know the role I'd played in the company's survival. Or maybe they did and just learned what it got me. I packed my things with the care of someone wrapping glass each item, a small betrayal. The photo of my daughter, the mug from the year we made Forbes fastest growing, the notebook with 2 years of margin notes and cost-saving hacks no one else ever saw. Martin stood outside his office as I walked past. Still no eye contact. Just the posture of a man watching a problem take itself out. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and didn't look back. They thought they'd silenced me, erased me. But what they didn't realize was I hadn't left empty-handed. I left with everything that mattered. And they were about to find out. I didn't go home. Not yet. I drove straight to a storage unit 12 miles from the office, where I kept backups of the things I never trusted to live on company servers. The door rolled up with a metallic groan, and I stepped inside the cool, dry space that smelled like old cardboard and concrete. From the back corner, I pulled out a plastic file bin, labeled only Q3 Contingencies. Inside were printouts, encrypted drives, and a tablet with a mirrored archive of every document I'd ever touched. They thought I was a creature of habit. What they didn't know was that my habit was preparation. Every email, every slide deck, every version of the financial recovery plan with metadata, showing my authorship, timestamps, and edit history. Copies of Martin's initial rejection, too negative, not aligned with brand messaging. His actual words, saved as PDFs. Then his later comments. Great strategic insight. Exactly the direction we need. Only this time, my name was scrubbed clean from the final version. I had it all. The original plan. The edits. The email chain where I'd proposed selling off the underutilized logistics centers 3 months before Martin announced it as his visionary operational realignment. Even the board meeting summary, where he claimed authorship while I sat in the 3rd row with my mouth shut. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger is loud and messy. What I felt was colder, sharper, surgical. Back at home, I uploaded the files to a secure cloud vault, then made 2 duplicate drives sewn locked in my desk drawer. The other, mailed to my attorney, with instructions only to open if I disappeared, died, or got desperate. I didn't trust the system anymore, but I trusted evidence, and I had enough to sink him. Martin thought he'd cut me loose, that I'd fade into LinkedIn silence and find some new analyst gig at half the salary. But I wasn't interested in bouncing back. I was interested in truth, in consequences, in making sure that the man who built his career on my work would choke on the story he'd tried to steal. They fired the wrong guy. And now, I had proof. I should have walked away. I had enough to burn Martin's reputation to ash already. But something itched at the back of my mind, an inconsistency I couldn't shake. The bonuses. When we cut spending across the board, executive comp wasn't supposed to be touched. It was frozen by board directive. Yet, in Martin's final Q3 report, there it was. A line item labeled Strategic Leadership Incentives, padded with 6 zeros and buried under administrative overhead. It didn't make sense. So I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I followed the numbers. I pulled up archived versions of the company's internal financial system. Most people didn't know you could still access the logs with the right session key and a little finesse. I did. And what I found wasn't just corporate greed. It was deliberate deception. The same shell vendor appeared over and over Brightwave Consulting. Vague descriptions like market insights and culture audits, always just under the threshold that triggered internal reviews. The payments had started small, 18, 0 here, 22, 500 there. Then they ballooned. 1 quarter, nearly 400, 0 went to Brightwave. I traced the registration through a digital breadcrumb trail. The business address was a mailbox drop in New Jersey. The listed principal? Elliot Crane, Martin's brother-in-law. I remembered the name from a Christmas party years ago, guy with slick hair and fake laughter. I pulled everything. Payment approvals, routing numbers, signed invoices with boilerplate language, and calendar logs showing closed-door meetings between Martin and the consultants. It was a laundering operation, legit on paper, fraudulent in practice. Money siphoned from operating budgets, funneled through family ties, and then dressed up as innovation spend. It wasn't just betrayal. It was embezzlement. I stared at the screen for a long time, thinking about all the people laid off under the guise of austerity, about the interns let go to cut costs, the stalled hiring plans, the frozen development pipeline. Meanwhile, Martin and his brother-in-law were skimming profit off the top like it was a game. I wasn't angry. I was past anger. Now it was purpose. Focus. It was time to pull the curtain back. And I knew exactly where to start. I created the email account on a private server, routed through a VPN farm, anonymized 6 ways from Sunday. I wasn't about to let them trace this back to Minot yet. The subject line read, Urgent. Financial irregularities. Linked to executive activity. I attached 3 sanitized documents. A ledger showing Brightwave's payment schedule. A redacted org chart linking Elliot Crane to Martin by family relation. And a clipped segment of a budget review that conflicted with the board's own compensation freeze directive. Just enough to rattle the hinges without blowing the door off. I sent it to 3 people. The head of audit, a retired board member with a reputation for integrity, and the chair of the compensation committee. Then I waited. It didn't take long. By morning, whispers had started. A hastily scheduled executive alignment check-in. A board. Only Zoom call. 2 calendar events vanished from Martin's public schedule, replaced by confidential session. An HR analyst I trusted forwarded me a screenshot Martin pacing alone in his office. Eyes wild. Sleeves rolled. The look of a man who just heard someone knocking on the closet where all his skeletons lived. On Slack, the finance team's channels went eerily silent. Water cooler jokes dried up. Someone posted a GIF of a burning room. It got deleted within minutes. The next day, I saw the leak reach the surface. An internal memo, vague and corporate. A third-party firm has been engaged to assist with financial systems integrity review. We remain committed to transparency. The usual corporate theater. But I recognized the signal. Panic. Martin was spiraling. He started showing up to meetings 15 minutes early. His responses in all company threads became uncharacteristically verbose. He even held an impromptu town hall, something he never did unless he was trying to rewrite a narrative before someone else could. We're entering a new chapter, he said, trying to sound visionary. But his eyes kept flicking toward the back of the room, the way prey scans for movement in the brush. They didn't know who sent the message. Not yet. But the walls were closing in, and I wasn't done. I'd loosened the first brick. Now I was going to bring the whole structure down one, quiet, calculated move at a time. I knew the numbers would never be enough on their own. Not in a world where damage is measured in optics, not ethics. The board would run their audit, sure, but if I wanted the truth to stick, I needed the public to see it too. That's when I called Claire Jensen, senior investigative reporter at Financial Wire. We'd crossed paths years ago when she wrote a story on tech sector whistleblowers. Back then, she told me, "If it ever happens to you, call me first." So I did. We met at a diner off Route 43. I slid her a flash drive across the table between a cup of black coffee and a half-eaten blueberry muffin. "You verify everything before you print it," I said. "No spin, no protection. You go where the truth takes you." She didn't smile. She just nodded and said, "Give me a week." Meanwhile, the cracks widened. After the anonymous leak, the board quietly authorized a comprehensive audit. But the word comprehensive came only after the first probe revealed that executive bonuses had exceeded approved limits by 38% over 2 years. Someone had backdated performance milestones. Expense reports didn't match actual travel records. Brightwave's contracts couldn't be accounted for in procurement system. Each inconsistency pointed to Martin, and each new discovery made his attempts at damage control more desperate. Employees noticed. Long overdue invoices suddenly got paid. Budget freezes were reversed. HR started sending out feedback surveys like a company, trying to prove it still had a soul, but nobody bought it. The mood in the building shifted from anxious to bloodthirsty. The same people who used to nod politely in the hallway now whispered in clusters by the elevators. The same junior execs who echoed Martin's buzzwords were now practicing safe distance. I watched all of it unfold from a distance, still invisible, still listening. Claire texted me 3 days later. "It's worse than I thought. 3 other shell vendors, 2 with ties to offshore accounts." I asked if she could prove it. "Yes," she replied. "But you need to be ready for what comes next." I was ready. I'd spent months preparing for this. But Martin? He was still playing politics, still betting that his image would outlast the truth. He didn't realize the house was already on fire. And the audit was pouring gasoline. The audit results came out on a Wednesday. The board scheduled an emergency session under the pretense of strategic alignment. But inside that room, the truth detonated. The forensic firm's report ran 93 pages, unauthorized bonuses, false vendor contracts, expense reimbursements tied to vacations disguised as client meetings. And at the center of it all, Martin Crane, CEO and architect of the company's so-called miraculous recovery. The numbers weren't just bad, they were criminal. Witnesses told me Martin went pale halfway through the presentation, then tried to shift blame to a senior VP who'd resigned months earlier. He claimed ignorance, then oversight, then bad data hygiene. But the signatures on the contracts were his. The emails with approval phrases like, "fast track this," and "let's keep it tight," were his. The shell companies? Registered to family names. And the Kickerone payment chain led straight to a luxury property he'd quietly purchased through a trust in his wife's maiden name. By 4 p.m., the board issued a statement, "Effective immediately. Martin Crane has stepped down as CEO for personal reasons. No thank you, no tribute." Just a corporate throat clearing wrapped in legal padding. But everyone knew what it meant. At 6 p.m., Claire's exposé went live. The fall of the finance hero. How Martin Crane faked a turnaround and looted his own company. Within minutes, it was trending. Screens lit up across the company phones buzzed, whispers grew louder, and Martin's legacy collapsed in real time. His face, once plastered across investor brochures, was now side by side with headlines about fraud, betrayal, and board negligence. The press circled like vultures. Shareholders issued demands. The company's value dropped 11% in a single day. Inside the office, people were stunned. Not because they didn't suspect something, but because it had actually come to light. No cover-up, no golden parachute. Just a man, stripped of power, watching everything he built on stolen credit come crashing down around him. And me? I sat on my porch with a black coffee and no regrets. The man who'd erased me from the story had just been deleted from the company. Not by rage, not by scandal, by truth, by proof. By the same numbers he thought no one else was paying attention to. Turns out someone was. The call came 2 days after the story broke. Blocked number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Mr. Cole, this is Rebecca Lynn, interim chair of the board. She didn't waste time. We know what you did. Not the leak what you built. The recovery plan. The systems. The transparency. Everything Martin claimed as his own. There was a pause. You kept this company from flatlining. We'd like to speak with you about your future here. I didn't answer right away. We met in a private conference room downtown. No press. No HR. Just 5 board members. Legal counsel. And a chair with my name on a temporary placard. They laid it out plainly. They needed someone who understood the company from the inside but had the spine to challenge it from the top. Not a figurehead. Not a fixer. A leader. Chief Strategy Officer, Rebecca said, with a mandate to reshape how we think, operate, and lead. I listened, then slid a single sheet across the table. My conditions: autonomy, direct reporting to the board, independent budget authority, veto power on executive compensation, full access to financial systems with no gatekeeping from operations, and no spin. I wasn't coming back to play nice. The room was silent as they read. A few eyebrows rose. One of them, an older guy with cufflinks shaped like chestnuts, chuckled and said, "He's not bluffing." I wasn't. After a long silence, Rebecca looked up. We accept. Unanimously. That night, I sat in my car outside the old headquarters. The same building I'd walked out of carrying a cardboard box, invisible to the people I'd helped save. Now I was returning not as an employee but as a reckoning. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was reclamation. Of work. Of voice. Of purpose. I wasn't there to destroy. I was there to rebuild. But this time, on my terms. The first thing I did was kill the silence. I reinstated open forums. Anonymous reporting. Weekly transparency memos that outlined where every dollar was going, who approved it, and why. No more hidden contracts. No more ghost vendors. Every executive was audited. Every expense scrutinized. Half the leadership team resigned in the first month. The other half were reassigned, demoted, or benched indefinitely. I didn't do it with malice. I did it with receipts. The analyst's pitance, a graveyard of potential, became the nerve center of the company. I cleared out 2 corner offices and turned them into breakout labs. Brought back 3 laid-off juniors and promoted the 1 intern who had once quietly corrected Martin's math in a meeting and gotten ignored. She now ran projections for our board presentations. We rewrote the codebase of the culture, line by line. No more empty slogans or strategic buzzwords. Just clarity, accuracy, integrity. Ethics weren't a sidebar, they were the product. We made it impossible for decisions to be made in shadows. If someone wanted power, they had to earn it with results, not posturing. People noticed. Our vendor reviews came back with glowing remarks. Client retention spiked. Investors who once sent cautious emails now requested in-person briefings. And internally, the place felt awake again. Not perfect, but honest. For the first time in years, you could feel it when you walked the halls. People weren't afraid anymore. I kept a single framed photo on my new desk. Not of Martin or the board or even the company logo. It was a screen cap of the original spreadsheet that started it all. Restructure draft Vone. File name unchanged. Author tag: Ethan Cole. Some days, I'd catch a junior analyst staring at it. I never explained it. I didn't need to. They already knew. 3 months after Martin's downfall, Capital Weekly named us one of the top 10 most resilient companies of the year. The article praised the turnaround, the internal reforms, the renewed trust among investors and employees. They asked to feature me in a profile photo shoot, interview, the usual exec on the rise spread. Your story deserves to be told, the editor wrote. We want to highlight the man behind the recovery. I read the email twice, then closed my laptop. It was never about that. I didn't take the meeting. Didn't need the recognition. I'd already watched what happens when someone builds their legacy on applause instead of actions. I wasn't chasing a spotlight, I was repairing something that mattered. And some things, the best things, don't need headlines. They just need to work. The article ran anyway. A high-angle photo of our new analyst's floor. Clean desks. Whiteboards filled with actual math instead of mission statements. No photo of me. Just a passing mention. Internal leadership overhaul led by a former finance analyst who now heads strategy. That was more than enough. One afternoon, I stayed late after most had gone. The office was quiet. The city outside humming with the soft chaos of people trying to outrun their own stories. I opened my file drawer, pulled out the first printed version of the recovery plan, creased, scribbled on, corner dog-eared from use. The same document I'd once slid across a table to a man who stole it, branded it, and tried to bury me with it. I framed it. Cheap black border. Nothing fancy. I hung it near the window behind my desk, just above eye level. And on the glass, I stuck a single yellow post-it with 4 words in my handwriting. It was never about credit. And below that, a 5th. It was about doing what was right. Most people didn't notice it. Some did. They'd pause, squint at the frame, then look at me as if they'd just solved a quiet puzzle. I didn't explain it. Because they already knew. And that after everything was enough. This story was intense. But this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.